Well, this morning I'm starting a brand new series called The Overcomers. And as you look into Scripture, you find this word about 34 times, overcome or overcomers. More often than not, it's used to describe you, and you are called and supposed to be an overcomer. So let me ask you this question. How many of you in the room would like to be an overcomer? How many of you would like to be? Half of you, good for you. Not sure about the other half. And I've got a little bit of bad news, though, for you, because there is a prerequisite to being an overcomer. You know what the bad news prerequisite of being an overcomer is? Adversity. You can't be an overcomer unless you have something to overcome. And here's the good news, is that the Bible promises you adversity. So this is all working out for you, isn't it? Jesus said this, you will have tribulation in this world. How many have that scripture on your fridge? Oh, a bunch of you have that one on your fridge. I always catch people on that. Yeah, I got that one. But here's how that ends, because it's don't finish it there. Jesus said, you will have tribulation in this world, but be of good cheer, for I have what? Overcome the world. The rest of us know that. And that's what we are called to. We are called to be overcomers because Jesus overcome. He has made you overcomers. And the Bible tells you, there's no way around it, that if you're a member of the human race, and most of you are, then you are going to have adversity and trouble and tribulation in this world. It doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor or educated or not, whether you're third world or first world, we're all going to have trouble. That's just the way it is. It's part of the human experience and the human journey. There's this little girl, and she's out playing in the backyard. She stands up and bumps her head on a tree limb. She runs into the house and says, Mommy, Joey hit me. And she says, but Joey's at soccer practice. And she stood there bewildered, and she said, you mean this kind of stuff can happen anytime? And I think that sort of describes life, right? Problems will come. We will all face adversity. The Bible says you will be persecuted, you will have adversity, you will have tribulation. It just goes with the territory. How many remember an old radio preacher? He might still be around. His name was R.W. Schambach. Do you remember him? He was a character. And he used to say, this is R.W. Schambach, coming from me from Tyler, Texas, under the big top. You don't have any problems. All you need is faith in God. You don't have any problems? All you need is faith in God? No, because you have problems, you need faith in God. The Bible promises you problems. Let me give you another preacher with initials. His name was R.C. Sproul, theologian. One day someone came up to him and said, Mr. Sproul, can you answer this question? Why is it that bad things happen to good people? He said, I wouldn't know. I don't know any good people. And you know, there's a little bit of truth in that. We can't just go through life saying that bad things happen to good people. We will all struggle in life because none of us are really that good. So this morning, my message is entitled Profile of an Overcomer. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at what it takes to become and to be an overcomer. In the book of Revelation, at the beginning couple of chapters, we see this interesting story where this letter is written to the 7 churches of Asia Minor. And it's actually Jesus speaking to the churches. And what he does for every single one of these 7 churches, he gives each one of them a critique or a challenge. And then he gives each one of them a commendation. And then he gives each one of them a promise. But the promise came with a condition. And the condition was this: to he who overcomes, I will. And so the promise was always conditional upon those who were overcomers, which, if you look at it and understand this, that being an overcomer is not automatic. You are not guaranteed to be an overcomer just because you're a member of the human race, even if you're a Christian. That doesn't necessarily make you an overcomer. The Bible says to he who overcomes. Overcoming is something we have to do. Overcoming and being an overcomer is something we have to be. And you see, here's what I want you to know. You were not born an overcomer. Overcomers are not born, they're made. You were not born a winner, you were born a whiner. It's true. I mean, you don't remember coming out of the womb, but I guarantee you whined coming out of the womb. What did you do? First thing out, what'd you do? You cried. Sure, you cried. And then every time something didn't go your way, you cried, right? When you were cold, you cried. When you were wet, you cried. And when you were hungry, you cried. When you were tired, you cried. When you were poopy, you cried. And when you were 34 and your parents kicked you out of the house, you cried again. It just became the pattern of your life, right? And that's who we were. We were born whiners. I don't know, on that point, I don't know if you've noticed this phenomena we have in our culture now called the boomerang kids. Do you know what I'm talking about? People my age know what I'm talking about. This is adult children moving back in with their parents. And 26% of Canadian adult children will move back in with their parents. In Australia, it's 50%. And this is how I dealt with it. I'm just going to give you this tip. When our son moved out, he's 25 years old. When we moved out, I said, son, you just need to know this. No matter what happens in your life, you can always remember that your room will be exactly as it is now. Empty! And that's the way it's going to stay, because I don't want my kids coming back. I'm not letting my kids come and move back in with me. You say, why not? Are you a mean parent? No, I'm a good parent because I believe they have to go face life and become overcomers. And what you have to do to become an overcomer, I already told you, the prerequisite was adversity, struggles, trouble, these sorts of things. So what we're going to do today in Profile of an Overcomer is we're going to look at these two men in Scripture, Joshua and Caleb. They were overcomers, and we're going to look at their profile, and we're going to look at what made these men overcomers. Let me remind you of the story. Moses leads the children of Israel across the Red Sea and into the wilderness, goes to Mount Sinai, gets the 10 Commandments, builds the Ark of the Covenant and the tabernacle and all that stuff. And we always think, if we don't think this through, we sometimes think that then they wandered for 40 years in the wilderness. Not true. Within a few weeks, they were actually at the edge of the promised land. You will remember this. It's in the book of Numbers, and we're going to look at it today. And so this is what he did. Moses went, and he picked one man from each of the 12 tribes of Israel. And he gathered these 12 men in, and he said, now I want you to go into the promised land, I want you to spy out the land, and I want you to bring us back a report. Now remember, nobody had ever been there. They'd been in captivity for over 400 years. They didn't know what was there. They didn't know who lived there. They didn't know what challenges were before them. So they needed to know. So they sent these 12 men in. And they were gone. Imagine waiting for these. Imagine if you were the 1 million or 1.5 million Jewish people waiting to hear what the report was. And then that day finally came. After a few days, they returned. And they had a pole. And there was 2 men with this pole. And hanging from the pole was a bunch of grapes so big that one man couldn't lift it. I've never seen a bunch of grapes like that. But they were bringing this. I mean, wouldn't that have been a good sign? These guys coming in with this load of grapes, this big, huge bunch hanging from this pole. And then they stood up and they gave the report. And that's where we pick up the story. So we are in Numbers chapter 13. We're going to look at verse 27. And this is what it says. Then they told him and said, we went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is the fruit. And they pointed to the grapes. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the mountains. And in this, the Canaanites dwell in the sea, by the sea, and along the banks of the Jordan. So he says they're all there. The Amorites are there, the Amalekites are there, the Hittites and the Hivites and the Hutterites and the Mennonites, they're all there. Every chance I get, right? They're all there. So verse 30, then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to, say it with me, overcome it. So there's courage and tenacity. Verse 31, but the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And then they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in are men of great stature. There we saw the giants. The descendants of Anak came from the giants, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. So I want you to imagine this picture for a moment. They're waiting for the report. The 12 men finally return. And there's really 2 camps of people. There's Joshua and Caleb. Joshua was on the same page as Caleb. And then the other 10 spies. And Caleb stands up and gives this report and says, yeah, there's fortified cities there. Yeah, there's giants in the land, but we are well able. Let's go up at once. But the other men, they quieted the crowd and said, we're not able. Now here's my question for you. Did they both see the same thing? Did both groups see the same thing? They went into the same land. They had the same experience. They went together. They went and spied out the land together. They both saw the giants, and they both saw the milk and the honey, and they both saw the grapes, and they both saw the good and the bad. They both groups spied out the group or the land together, and then they came up and they got two very distinct reports. And the one group says, only Joshua and Caleb says, we are well able, let's go at once. And the others said, we are not able because they are stronger than us. And then they said this, we were as grasshoppers in our own sight and also in theirs. Let me give you a little news flash on this. If you see yourself as a grasshopper in life, so will everybody else. If you see yourself as insignificant and ineffective and inefficient, if you see yourself as small in life, other people will see you as small. And you know what? They're right. People are going to see you as grasshoppers, see them as grasshoppers, if that's their perspective on it. And see, here's the thing I need to remind you. There are always giants in the land. There are giants in the land today. There are giants of industry and giants of finance, and there's giants of politics, and there's always going to be someone stronger than you, am I right? There's always going to be someone greater, stronger, better, smarter, richer. Well, except for Donald Trump, he won't have anybody stronger or better or richer than him. But other than Donald Trump, everybody else, we all exist in this world where there will always be someone bigger and better and stronger than you. It doesn't matter how good you are, whatever business or job you do, there's always someone greater. So what? What does that have to do with anything? It doesn't have to do with anything. Of course there's going to be people stronger and better and smarter than you. That has nothing to do with it. What it has to do with how you see yourself. So here's the profile of an overcomer. Number one is attitude is everything. You see, what happened with these two groups of people is that Joshua and Caleb, they had the attitude of an overcomer. And so they saw the promise, and therefore they were overcomers. But the other 10, they saw the problems, therefore they were overwhelmed. And so it really all starts with this. It all starts with our attitude. Attitude is everything. What is your perspective on things? And you know, the situation was the same for everybody. The only difference between them, again, was coming back to this thing called attitude. Attitude is everything. Let me show you a picture of a book cover. How many of you know who this guy is? His name is Nick Vujicic, and the Serbian name, hard to pronounce, but he is this interesting man who was born without arms or without legs his entire life. He had a very poor start in life because, his parents were shocked. They didn't know why. They had a son without arms and without legs. He was teased at school. He had difficulties. When he was only 10 years old, he attempted suicide because he thought his life wasn't worth living. He failed, fortunately, at that, but because when he was a teenager, he became a Christian, and he began to look at himself differently, and he realized that what he was on the outside had nothing to do with who he really was. And when he found out who he really was on the inside, everything changed for him. And this guy's been, how many of you have seen him on, Oprah or TV or YouTube? He's all over the place because he's a tremendously inspirational person who all of a sudden decided without hands to grab a hold of life and make the best out of it. It's amazing what he can do and what he has done. For example, he skydives. He's jumped out of a plane at 13,000 feet. He golfs, which he doesn't even have arms or legs or hands, and yet he goes out to the golf course. He surfs, if you can imagine. He's been out there surfing. He loves to swim. Swimming is one of his absolute favorite sports. If you look at this picture, it kind of looks like he's drowning. And the reason he's so far under the water, I'll tell you why, is because he loves to dive off the high diving board. He goes swimming, he goes off the diving board, dives into this water, goes way under, right down to the bottom, but he has good news because he bobs up to the top like a cork. He said, I don't have the impediments other people do with swimming, which is their arms and legs that are always flopping around. He has all these clever little expressions that no arms, no legs, no worries is what he says. Limbless and limitless. He's gone and he's got married. He's got a wife. He's got 2 kids now. And you can see his wife's pregnant in that particular picture. He has just grabbed a hold of life and he's living it for the fullness. He's a highly inspirational speaker. He's got this Australian accent because he's from Australia. And he packs out stadiums with thousands. And he's spoken to probably hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people. And he has this message of hope for people that you're only as disabled as you want to be. And attitude is everything. And you can't go through life thinking that you aren't everything that you were meant to be, because those things have nothing to do with your success in life. See, attitude is everything. But see, we live in this culture where we have a lot of grasshoppers. And you know what the grasshopper mentality does? The grasshopper mentality starts to begin to think that you are a victim of your circumstances. And have you noticed how many people are victims in our society? Everybody's a victim of something. The government did this, or so-and-so did this, or my boss did this. And everybody goes around whining and complaining because they've been so hard done by, because their circumstances have conspired against them. You are not limited by your circumstances, only by your attitude. And do we really want to go through life? Do you really want to go through life as a victim? You know, there's a book written by a man by the name of Charles Sykes, and it's called A Nation of Victims. It's a terrible book. But what it does is it talks about how our culture has taken on this victimhood mentality. And he gives dozens, perhaps hundreds of bizarre examples of this. I'll give you just one. In his book, he writes a story about an FBI agent who embezzled $2,000, which law enforcement agents have no trouble doing. And then he went to Atlantic City and he gambled the money away. He got caught and he got fired because he's a gambler and a thief. He went and took the FBI to court saying he was unlawfully dismissed because his gambling was an addiction. Therefore, he was fired because of his disability. Now, here's the worst part of the story. He took it to court and he won. And the FBI had to reinstate a man who was a thief and a gambler. Really? Is this the world we live in now? Where people are victims of their circumstances and everything is always conspiring against you? You know what? You look around you and you will see people, hopefully you're not one of them, you will see people who are always trying to look for someone or something to blame their problems on. There's this story of this man. He's on his deathbed. He's dying. His wife is by his side. He reaches up and grabs her hand. And he said, "Honey, you've always been by my side. You were by my side when I got fired from my job. You were by my side when I started my business and it failed. You were by my side when I declared bankruptcy. You were by my side when we lost the house. You were by my side when I crashed and rode off the car. And now that I've lost my health and I am dying, you are still by my side. Honey, can I tell you something?" She leaned down and said, "What, dear?" And he said, "Honey, I think you might be bad luck." Always looking for someone to blame. You know what? I'll tell you something interesting. This is probably going to get me in trouble. But I've done enough prison ministry to know that there's actually no guilty people in prison. They're all innocent because they got a bad rap or a bad judge or a bad lawyer or bad police work. It's amazing, people. You don't know this. The whole prison system is full of innocent people who are victims of their circumstance. Isn't that amazing? And, you know, I remember there's this story years ago in Texas. There was a governor by the name of Governor Pt.1. And he was the prosecutor before he became governor, and he was a very effective prosecutor. He tried 422 criminal cases, and he put 406 of them behind bars. So he was very effective. So the very person that puts these people behind bars ends up becoming the governor. Now, in the 20s and 30s, when he was the governor, there was no parole system in Texas. And the only way you ever got out, if you had a 10 to 20 year sentence, you didn't get out at 10 unless the governor pardoned you. Otherwise, you served the whole sentence. So people were always looking for a pardon from the governor. So every once in a while, he had to make a visit to the state penitentiary, and he would talk to the men. And so he would address the men, and he'd say, "If anyone want to talk to me privately, you can," and they would line up. And one day he had this huge lineup of men, and one by one they told him how they were innocent and how they were set up and how they were falsely accused, and story after story after story. Except for one man. Only one man in that group, and he said, "Governor, I just want you to know I am guilty. I did this thing, and I committed this crime, and I am paying the punishment for it, and I deserve to be here. And if I ever do get out, my promise to you and to society is I will do everything in my power to become a great citizen." He only gave one pardon out that day. Guess who he gave it to? The one who admitted he was guilty. The one who realized he was not a victim, and he took responsibility for his own life and for his own actions. And see, that's who we are. We have a responsibility for our attitude. We can choose our attitude. You know what I love about the Apostle Paul? Because he dresses this. You know, when the Apostle Paul came to your town, he wouldn't write you ahead of time and say, what kind of hotels do you have there? Do you have a Four Seasons? Do you have a Ramada Inn? He would write you and say, what are your prisons like? Because that's probably where I'm going to end up. And here was a guy whose entire ministry was marked and characterized by what? By being beaten and flogged and shipwrecked and abused and thrown in jail and stoned. And this is what he came to expect. And so he writes in the book of Philippians, he says, one thing I have done, in whatever state I am in, I have learned to be content. Did you hear that? He learned to be, do you think he wants to be in prison? Think when he got thrown in the slammer, he'd go, whoa, just love it here. Just love these prisons. This is exactly what I want to be. You go read the book of Acts. You see him at midnight singing hymns. Everybody's locked up, whining, moaning. He's singing hymns. Is it because he just loves prison so much? No. He says, whatever state I am in, I have learned, I have chosen to be content. Attitude is everything. Let me tell you, I think on this subject, probably my favorite story of all time. If you've read my book, you've read this story, A Greater Purpose. And the story is about Viktor Frankl. And Viktor Frankl, it was an Austrian Jew in the Second World War. In 1942, the Nazis came into their town, and they killed his wife, and they killed his children, and they killed his mother, and they killed his father, and they took him to a POW camp. Then they stripped him naked, hosed him down, and there he stood in front of his captors, completely naked, with only his wedding ring on his hand, the only thing left. A guard spotted it, came over and snipped it off, and now he had lost that. He later writes about his experience, and he said that was the lowest moment in his life. And he had a realization, an epiphany in that moment. And he didn't say it out loud, but this is what he thought. He thought, you can take my wife, and you can take my children. And you can take my parents, and you can take my family. And you can strip me of my clothes and strip me of my dignity. But there is one thing you cannot take from me, and that is the power to choose how I will respond to how you treat me. And what he realized, that even in the absolute abject lowest place that a human being could get, that he had the power to choose his attitude. He wrote a book about it. Here it is. It's called Man's Search for Meaning. And he talks about this concept of the fact that the greatest human freedom in his estimation, he was a neurologist and a psychiatrist rather, and he said the greatest human freedom was that we all have the power to choose our attitude in any situation that we are in. And so it doesn't matter where you are in life. It doesn't matter what you're facing. It doesn't matter what struggles or hardship you are dealing with. You have the freedom and you have the power to decide what kind of attitude you're going to have in the midst of that. And you see, we don't always have the power. God doesn't always give us the power to change our predicament, but he always gives us the power to change our perspective. And if you will change your perspective, guess what happens? More often than not, your predicament changes. You know, one of the things I do when we hire people, we have a big staff here. We have 50 people on staff amongst all our campuses and whatever. And for me, attitude's everything. I hire people based on attitude. I actually don't care how gifted they are. I mean, I do want gifted and talented people. But at the end of the day, that's not going to carry it. Because for me, attitude trumps aptitude. And I need people who are going to have a great attitude. Because the worst thing you can have in your family or your organization or your church, whatever it is, the worst thing you can have is people of a negative attitude. People who are critical and negative and petty and territorial and competitive. And people who are easily offended. You know why? Those people are toxic. Those people drag everybody down with them. And you don't actually have any place for that in your life. And if you're one of those people, you don't have place for that. See, attitude is everything. You know, they've done a research project on pessimists, and they've discovered that all pessimistic people actually have the same blood type. Did you know that? Yeah, B negative. Yeah, these are the kind of people that are so negative, you put them in a dark room, they develop. Yeah, right? You know what the difference between a pessimist and a car battery is? Even a car battery has a positive side, right? So the first thing is this: attitude is everything. It's really true. But the second thing about being an overcomer is that action is essential. See, it's not good enough just to have the attitude. Then you have to act on the attitude. Action is absolutely essential. See, Caleb has this great attitude. He says, we are well able to overcome it. But don't miss the first part of his statement. He said, let us go up at once. He was willing to go into battle. He was willing to act. Now, he didn't, because the rest of the people, who carried the day, the 2 or the 10 that day? The 10, the negativity carried the day, and those people said that they were not going to go in, and consequently, those entire generation of people didn't go into the promised land. But eventually, Joshua and Caleb did. They finally went in, and when they did, they had to act. And you can go read the story about, it was 45 years later, actually, when you have Caleb, and he's standing at the base of Mount Horeb, the very place that he had spied out years ago. And he said, I am as strong this day. He says, here I am, 85 years old, and I'm as strong this day for making war, for coming in and going out, as I was when Moses sent me. Let's just think about that just for a moment. Was he really? He's 85 years old. Was he really as strong as he was when he was 40? I'm personally not buying it. I believe he thought he was as strong, right? I mean, my mom's 85. She thinks she can take on the world, but someday she can't tie her own shoes. Sorry, Mom. She's sitting right there. I had to use her as an illustration, tell everybody how old she is. But I don't believe for a minute that he was as strong as he was when he was 40. You know 85-year-olds. You know 40-year-olds. But see, what kind of strength was he talking about? See, let's compare this to another story about another guy who took on giants. Because Caleb was about to go up against giants. But we have another story later on in the scripture about a young boy named David. And David is maybe 16, 17 years old, and he goes up against a giant named Goliath, who again was a descendant of Anak. And he was 9 feet, 9 inches tall. And of course, he has all the attitude in spades, right? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine who defies the armies of the living God? I mean, you know, that's bold, that's bravado. But at the end of the day, he backs it up with what? Action. Action is essential. And here's this young kid, and he's got 5 smooth stones and a sling, and he runs into battle against Goliath. Now, here's my question. Is there any physical matchup here whatsoever? It's not going to happen. So what was it? What kind of strength did Caleb, an old man, and David, a young man, what kind of strength did they possess? Because it wasn't external strength. There was someone bigger and some stronger. What kind of strength? Inner strength. Strength of spirit. See, that's what makes all the difference in the world. You can go up against giants if you understand this thing called inner strength. How many remember growing up where, you know, you had this schoolyard taunts, right? And it was like, my dad's bigger than your dad. My dad can beat up your dad. My grandma can beat up your grandma. And, you know, you have these, and it was all about who was bigger and who was stronger. Do you remember that? When you're 5 and 6 and 10 years old. And we always taught our kids this. We said, you know what? There's always going to be someone bigger and always going to be someone stronger. But that's not the point. Who are you on the inside? Because inner strength is what's really important. Inner strength is not only what propels you to be victorious in life, it actually what propels you to be defeated in life and be able to deal with it. Did Joshua and Caleb win every battle? No. Go read the book. They didn't win every battle, but they had inner strength, so they kept on moving. They kept on struggling, and they kept on going forward because they had this thing. David, Caleb, Joshua, the profile of an overcomer, what did they possess? They possessed inner strength. And I know about this point, you're saying, well, how do I know? How do I know if I possess inner strength? Well, it's called the toothpaste test. You say, well, what's the toothpaste test? Well, it's like this. When the pressure's on, what's on the inside comes out, right? That's the toothpaste test. And you will never really know what you're made of until you are facing pressure and adversity. And when the pressure comes on, then you'll determine who you really are. And it will show whether you are there or whether you're not there. Let me tell you an experience I had when I was about 11 or 12 years old. When I was around that age, my mother sent me off, me and my kid brother, off to Camp Stevens. Camp Stevens is the YMCA camp. It's on Lake of the Woods. It's on an island 7 miles south of Kenora. And here you are, you're amongst 10 and 11 and 12-year-olds, and you arrive on this island where there doesn't seem to be any adult supervision whatsoever. The counselors are 15 and 16 years old. Like, what do they know? And you get there and you realize you've entered the world of the Lord of the Flies. And literally, people think I'm joking about this. Literally, we made, first day, you make a loincloth. And we danced naked around the fire. We were all carrying pointy sticks and knives, and chaos ensued for this entire 2 weeks. You think I'm making this stuff up? I've had people coming up to me all weekend saying, I remember that. I remember dancing naked around the fire. And so we lived, it was this bizarre experience. Who sends their 11-year-old off to that? And so, every summer my mother sent me off to Camp Stevens to become a man. And so the first week, the first time I'm there, I arrived there, and I'm a little concerned about it, a little intimidated by the whole thing. But by my good fortune, my bunkmate, the guy in my own cabin, was Louis. And Louis was the veteran. He was 12, and his parents loved him so much, they sent him there for the whole summer. I later realized maybe it wasn't they loved him so much, it was something else they so much. They were getting rid of him, I figured. But anyway, so it couldn't be happier. I've got Louis in my cabin, and he's my bunkmate right below me, and I'm on the upper bunk. Well, about a week into it, they send you out. If this wasn't bad enough, this environment of chaos and disorganization and anarchy, they send you on a wilderness canoe trip with a 15-year-old leading it. And you get into canoes and you go off and who knows where, and you will probably die. But you get sent off because they're making men of us. And so imagine my good fortune when my canoe mate was Louis. And of course, the strong guy always goes in the stern and the weak man in the bow. And so I was in the bow and Louis was in the stern. Little did I realize that if I was being matched up with Louis, guess what that meant? It meant I was the weak link, is what it meant. The strongest guy and the weakest guy. Here we were in this canoe. So we went off. I could not have been prouder. Being Louis's bow man, the veteran, as we went off, and it was beautiful, and it was sunny, and it was calm, and we had the first day and a half were perfect. And Louis was very confident and laissez-faire because, he knew the woods and he knew the lake. And we were lagging behind one afternoon, taking in the rays, and the other canoes had got ahead of us. And just then, one of those great afternoon storms blew up. And this storm came in, and all of a sudden, the waves were 3 and 4 feet high. And the clouds came in, and the winds came in, and the rain started pelting. And the other canoes had made it to the leeward side of the next island, and they were safe. And they pulled up there, and they looked back, and there we were caught, trapped in the open water. And so we were paddling like mad, and we were paddling that way, but we were going this way. And we realized we were in trouble. But I didn't have anything to worry about because I was with Louis, the veteran. And Louis says, this is what we're going to do. We're going to make our way closer to the shore. And I'm thinking, why is it going to be better closer to that shore over there? We're trying to go that way. The shore is over there. And because we're on the windward side, it's going to be just as rough over there. So I thought, he knows what he's doing. And so we paddle, and we're moving this way, and we're still not going forward. And we get close to the shore. We're about 25 feet from the shore. And guess what Louis does? He jumped out of the canoe and swam for the island. He abandoned me in the bow, in the back of the canoe, and I'm sitting in the bow by myself in a storm, and Louis swimming for shore. I thought, what is wrong with this guy? Under pressure, he folded like a cheap lawn chair. And so I paddled like mad over to the shore, and I tied up the canoe, and there he was. He was just wigging out, completely freaking out. And I went over and something rose up inside of me because I decided I wasn't going to die there that day. There's no way those guys are coming back. They can't come back because, they're there waiting. They're not coming back for us. And something rose up, this righteous indignation rose up, and I grabbed Louis by the back of the neck, and I said, you get back in that canoe. And I led him over to the canoe, and I put him in the bow. And I got into the stern, and I took charge. And we paddled with all our might. We finally made it there that day. Under pressure, something welled up. An inner strength came out of me. In that moment, at 11 years old, I realized there was leadership in me, and I've been bossing everybody around ever since. I'm glad you enjoyed that story. So the first thing is this, that the attitude is everything. The second thing is that action is essential. And the last and the final thing is that achievement is eventual. Now, don't miss this about being an overcomer. You don't necessarily overcome the day that you have a great attitude or the day that you act. And when we look at this story of Joshua and Caleb, it was 40 years before they finally went in, and 45 years before he finally took that mountain of Horeb. It was a long journey. And why did it take so long? Because he had to wait for everybody in the wilderness to pass away. You see, Joshua and Caleb were the only two people of the entire nation of Israel over 40 years old. That entire generation that was there 40 years old, 40 years earlier, had to pass away. Imagine trying to keep a good attitude as you're waiting for everybody to die, right? You're walking through the wilderness. You know, you don't want to hope they're going to die, but it is going to speed things up. And you know, when somebody drops and you think another one bites the dust. You think Freddie Mercury wrote that song? I don't think so. I think Joshua and Caleb. Another one bites the dust. Dun, dun, dun. Are you happy? Are you satisfied? Have you had enough of the heat? Dun, dun, dun. Another one bites the dust, and another one down, and another one down, and another one bites the dust. You didn't know you were going to get a song today, did you? But the visual helps you, because here they had to deal with this. They had to deal with the fact that people were going to pass off around them. There was people of a bad and a negative attitude that weren't going in with them, but they had determined that they were going to stand, and if they stood, they would end up getting the promise, which they did. And so what is the profile of an overcomer? Is that attitude is everything, action is essential, and achievement is eventual. Why are you an overcomer? I'll tell you why. Because greater is he who is in you than he who is in the world. And if God be for you, who can be against?